My name is Chloe. I'm 24, and until last week, my life was a calendar of meetings in Toronto, takeout containers stacked by the sink, and a sleep budget that never cleared 4 hours. I told people I liked the pace because it sounded brave. The truth was simpler. I didn't know how to stop. When my manager insisted I finally use my vacation days, I opened my suitcase and realized it was already packed. I hadn't unpacked in months, different hotels, the same shirts. That felt like a message I couldn't ignore. By sunset, I was driving past the sign for my lake town, windows cracked to let in air that didn't smell like elevators and printer ink. The streets were narrower than I remembered. The grocery still leaned into the corner like it was tired. A kid biked past, holding a loaf of bread in one hand like a trophy. I parked behind the used bookstore with the green awning and carried my boxes up the exterior stairs to the small apartment above it. The landlord had called it a studio with personality. The outlets were loose, and one cabinet door moaned like a complaint. But the place had clean light and a view of the alley where the delivery trucks exhaled and left. A mom had moved in with her husband on the other side of town. We talk, but it's the steady kind, not the daily kind. She texted a photo of a casserole on their kitchen island and a line about stopping by if I wanted. I told her I'd come next week. I needed a day to hear my own thoughts without someone else deciding whether they were reasonable. I walked the rooms, really just one room with ambitions, and set a mug on the counter as if that made me a tenant. The floor kept a faint smell of the old bakery that once occupied the space. I stood by the window and tried to place the way the light hit the brick across the alley. It was all familiar and not, like a song played a notch slower, I'd planned to sleep. Instead, I made a list. Sheets, lamp, bath mat, coffee. The practical items felt like a promise that I'd be here long enough to use them. I changed into an old hoodie and went out. The air off the lake had a bite, the kind that clears your head without asking permission. On Maine, people nodded in that small town way where you're recognized even if your name is just out of reach. I bought bread from the morning kid's mom who rang me up and said, "Back for good?" I said, "Back for now," and we both let that answer stand. Back upstairs, I spread a blanket on the mattress and watched the ceiling fan wobble through its first brave rotation. I tried to remember the last week I'd cooked for myself. The last morning I didn't check email before brushing my teeth. The last time I woke up without a city pressing against the windows. I couldn't find clear dates for any of it. Before bed, I opened the suitcase, pulled out my Toronto badge lanyard, and set it in a drawer I didn't plan to open often. The apartment settled around me with the kinds of sounds buildings make when they haven't been asked to hurry. I turned off my phone. It felt reckless, then necessary. I didn't believe in grand resolutions. I wanted something smaller, to wake up and recognize my own handwriting on the day, to make coffee that didn't taste like urgency, to see what was left when the noise was gone. I thought I was home to rest. Standing in that half-furnished room, I understood I was here to find out who I was without a badge, a flight number, or a borrowed desk, and that would have to be enough for tonight. On my third morning, I woke up before the bookstore owner rolled up the metal gate. The lake had that pale look it gets when the day can't decide if it's warm or not. I grabbed a paper cup from the bakery and walked toward the marina because I wanted to see if the docks still creaked the same way they did when I was a kid. Halfway down the pier, a guy in a gray cap lifted a small outboard onto a workbench like it was a bag of groceries. He glanced up. I knew the eyes before my brain caught up. "Chloe," he said, as if testing the name for expiration. "I tan," I answered, and there it was, 2 syllables I hadn't said out loud since high school graduation. We grew up on the same block. Summers meant sunburned noses and cheap guitars. He used to tape set lists to the inside of his binder. Now he worked at the boat service, hands nicked from metal edges, a pencil behind his ear. He smelled like cut cedar and fuel. It fit him the way suits had never fit me. He wiped his palms on a rag before offering one. "Heard you were in Toronto." "Was," I said. Now I'm upstairs from the bookstore, trying to convince a cabinet door to stay attached. "That building," he pointed with the pencil, amused. "It'll fight you, but it's teachable." He didn't ask why I left. He asked if I took sugar. I didn't, but I took the second coffee he handed me anyway. We sat on a bench near the service shed, watching a father teach a kid to tie a cleat hitch. The boy crossed the rope the wrong way twice and then got it. The dad didn't cheer. He just nodded like, yeah, that's how it's done. We traded quick notes. My apartment, his job, my mother's move, his sister's new baby. The easy version of catching up. He laughed about a customer who insisted a bilge pump had feelings. I told him about a project manager who used the word ping like a comma. He shook his head. I like machines. They tell you what's wrong if you listen right. When I stood to go, he squinted at my bag of hardware store supplies. You're replacing half a kitchen with that? It's a start. He set the pencil down. I get off at 4. I can swing by and look at whatever's humming or leaking. No charge except a cup of coffee not made on a boat. I hesitated out of habit. In Toronto, I kept favors small and rare. Here, refusing help sounded like a different kind of performance. Okay, I said. There's a lamp that blinks like a nervous eye. At 4:15, he climbed the exterior stairs, carrying a toolbox that looked older than both of us. He tested every outlet with a small device that beeped. He stood on a chair and tightened the fan mount until the wobble calmed. He asked if I wanted the deadbolt to stop sticking or to keep sticking, depending on how much I trusted the alley. Stop, I said, and he made it stop. We ate sandwiches on the floor because I hadn't found chairs yet. He told me the marina gossip, who'd switched slips, who'd finally admitted their boat was more lawn ornament than vessel. I told him about my boss's insistence on 12-minute stand-ups that lasted 45. We laughed, not to fill space, but because the stories were genuinely odd. When he reached for tape, his hand paused over my key on the counter. You want me to hang a smoke detector tomorrow? He asked. I've got one in the shop. Please, I said too quickly, then slower. Yeah, if you don't mind. He touched the key, then looked at me. Want me to take this so I can get in if you're out? Only if you want. There was a beat where the city part of my brain prepared a speech about boundaries, and the rest of me pictured a late delivery, a missed doorbell, a still apartment. Take it, I said, but only for house stuff. House stuff, he repeated, pocketing it like it weighed something. He rinsed his hands at my sink, left the counter cleaner than he found it, and headed for the stairs. At the door, he paused. Your place is going to be good, he said, matter of fact. It's got bones. Bones, I echoed, and he grinned like we'd agreed on a plan. After he left, the room felt steadier. The lamp stayed on. The fan hummed without complaint. I set the spare key's twin in a drawer and told myself this was practical, nothing more. Later, when I turned off the lights, the town settled into its evening, and I realized I was calmer than I'd been in months. Not fixed, just steadier, and that counted. By the end of my first week, the days had slowed enough for me to notice small things. The hum of the refrigerator, the paper smell from the bookstore below, the way light moved across the wall like time-lapse weather. I started making coffee at the same hour each morning just to hear the kettle whistle. Routine had become a strange kind of therapy. Aiton stopped by most evenings. Sometimes he came straight from the docks, still smelling of salt and engine oil. He'd fix something small, a buzzing socket, a door hinge that sighed too much, and stay for a cup of coffee that always ended up cold. I told myself it was convenience, nothing deeper. But he had this way of listening that made simple talk feel heavier than it should. One afternoon, I came home to find a note taped to the door. Replace the fuse. Light steady now. I smiled before I even saw his handwriting. It was the kind of gesture you don't get in cities, where favors come with meeting invites. That weekend, I bought a small desk from a local shop and spent an hour rearranging furniture until the room felt less like a storage unit and more like a place someone lived. I worked remotely now, short freelance contracts, small projects that didn't require office clothes. The work was quiet, and the quiet was new. Sometimes I caught myself missing the sound of the subway brakes, the tension in people's voices, the feeling that something urgent was always happening. Then I'd walk to the lake, sit on the wooden steps near the marina, and remember why I'd left. One evening, Aitan dropped by with a box of bulbs. For your balcony, he said. You can hang them up, they don't burn much power. He reached for the ladder before I could answer. We ended up sitting out there under the soft yellow light, feet on the railing, listening to the faint splash of oars somewhere in the dark. The air smelled like rain and wet leaves. You ever think you'd come back? He asked. No, I said honestly. I thought leaving meant I'd never need to. He nodded, pulling at the label on his bottle. I used to think staying meant giving up. We both laughed at how those ideas sounded now, like they belonged to other versions of us. He told me about his old band, how one of the guys moved to Vancouver, another to Boston. I stayed for a year thinking we'd get back together. Then I realized I liked the quiet too much. I'm still figuring out if I do, I said. He looked at me then, not long, just enough that I felt it. There was a kind of calm in him that made me uneasy, like I could lean into it too easily. I changed the subject, asked about boats, repairs, anything to fill the space. He left later than usual that night, after checking that the lights on the balcony were secure. You'll get used to the rhythm here, he said at the door. It's slower, but it sticks. After he left, I sat out there alone. The town below was half asleep. One diner sign still glowing, a dog barking once, the sound of tires over gravel. I realized how long it had been since I'd gone a whole day without feeling rushed. The stillness wasn't empty anymore. It was something else, something like breathing without counting seconds. The next morning, I found the key I'd given him still missing from its hook. He hadn't forgotten to return it. I hadn't asked. I told myself it was fine. He might need it for the smoke detector or whatever else he decided needed fixing. But I caught myself glancing at the counter more than once, wondering if comfort and dependency always started this quietly. That night, the rain came hard. I sat by the window, lights dim, laptop closed, and thought about the version of me who thought happiness was tied to a job title or a skyline. She'd never believed she could end a day this simply. A warm cup in hand, the faint glow of balcony bulbs, and the sound of water hitting the roof. It didn't feel like peace yet, but it was close enough to reach. It had been one of those days when everything blurred together. 3 deadlines, a glitchy laptop, too many polite emails that somehow drained all my energy. By the time I walked home, my shoulders felt like they'd been carrying a week instead of a day. I didn't want conversation or screens or thoughts. I wanted to disappear for an hour. I ran the bath, poured in too much soap, and let the steam fog the mirror. The lights were low, the playlist soft and slow, the kind that doesn't demand attention. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension leave my hands. I could breathe again. I didn't hear the door unlock. The sound blended with the rain outside. When I finally noticed footsteps, it was already too late to call out. Eitan's voice came quietly from the hallway. Chloe, you home? He stepped into the bathroom doorway before either of us had time to think. For a moment, neither of us moved. I froze, water slipping over my skin. His silhouette caught in the doorway's dim light. The look on his face wasn't shock exactly, more like confusion, like his body had arrived somewhere his mind hadn't agreed to go. He turned away fast, hand gripping the doorframe. God, I'm sorry, he said. I thought you were out. You left your porch light on? There was a leak downstairs, and... His voice stumbled over the reasons. It's fine, I said, though my pulse didn't believe it. Next time, maybe knock. Yeah, he took a breath, still facing the hall. You're right. I should have... He didn't leave right away. I saw his reflection in the mirror, his shoulders tense, his jaw set. It wasn't awkwardness, not exactly. It was something quieter and heavier. I realized then that the distance between us had changed, even though neither of us moved. When he finally turned to go, our eyes met for a second that stretched longer than it should have. There was no smile, no apology that could untangle what that second meant. I couldn't read it. Maybe regret, maybe curiosity, maybe both. Then he stepped back, muttered a second sorry, and left. I stayed in the water long after it went cold. My brain replayed the moment again and again, trying to decide what it was, an accident, a mistake, or the start of something we hadn't agreed to name. The key on my counter felt like an answer to a question I hadn't realized I was asking. Later, when I walked out into the main room, the door was still half open. He'd left the hallway light on, a thin stripe of brightness cutting across the floor. I closed it gently, locked it this time, and stood there listening to the rain. It wasn't drama. It wasn't a movie. It was two people colliding by accident and realizing the ground beneath them wasn't as steady as they thought. I told myself it didn't matter, that things like this fade if you let them. But when I lay down, the air still felt charged, like a line of conversation left unfinished. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. I watched their glow through the blinds, counting each one as it blinked. I wanted to believe the night would smooth itself out by morning, that we'd both know how to forget. But deep down, I knew forgetting wasn't the problem. It was what that moment had revealed, something already there, waiting for the wrong kind of opportunity to be noticed. The next day started like nothing had happened. I worked from my desk, answered emails, made coffee that tasted off, and told myself I'd imagined half of last night. When the sound of footsteps came from the stairs around 6, my stomach still tightened. He knocked this time, just once. Eitan stood there with 2 paper cups. "Didn't know how you take it anymore," he said, "so I brought both." "Good strategy," I said, trying to sound light. I stepped aside, pretending this was normal, pretending my heart wasn't running laps. He looked around the room, eyes catching the faint steam mark still on the bathroom window. "Everything okay with the leak downstairs?" I asked quickly. "Fixed," he said. "Didn't want to bother you about it last night." "I should have called first." I nodded, wrapping my hands around the cup, even though it was too hot. "It's fine. Really." We stood near the counter, the silence stretching but not snapping. He looked tired, like he'd gone over the same memory too many times. "You were right," he said finally. "I should have knocked." I said it because I didn't know what else to say. He gave a half smile. "You handled it better than I did." I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a breath. "Let's just agree it was a weird moment and move on." "Sure," he said, then softer. "If that's what you want." We sat by the window, watching a couple of teens go by on bikes, laughing loud enough to drown out the unease. He told me about a new job at the marina, some tourist group renting small boats for the season. I told him one of my clients had offered me a longer contract, maybe 3 months of steady work. We were talking, but both of us were somewhere else, orbiting around what we wouldn't name. When he stood to leave, he hesitated by the door. "Chloe," he said, eyes on the floor. "About last night, there was a second where I didn't know if I should leave or say something. I just didn't want you to think." He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. "Forget it." I looked at him then, really looked. The familiar calm he always carried was cracked. "You don't need to explain." We both froze. That's all he met my eyes, and for a heartbeat it wasn't awkward. It was honest. "Maybe, but I haven't stopped thinking about it." That landed somewhere deep. I set the coffee down before I dropped it. "Aitan," I said quietly, "you have someone, don't you?" He exhaled. "Megan, yeah." "Then we shouldn't make this complicated." He nodded slowly. "You're right." He started to turn, then paused. "You know what's funny? You said we didn't expect it, but I think we kind of did." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to add. He opened the door, let in a draft of lake air, and was gone. The apartment felt smaller afterward, like his absence took up space. I sat on the couch replaying every line, every pause. I told myself it was just confusion, a charged second, nothing more. But deep down, I knew what he meant. We'd both been waiting for something neither of us had permission to want. That night, I washed the cups and lined them up on the counter, like proof that nothing was broken. But when I turned out the light, the quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like holding my breath. I didn't see him for 2 days. Each morning, I checked the alley without meaning to. Each night, I tried not to think about that look at the door, the one that made everything both too close and too far at the same time. 3 days passed before I saw him again. By then, I'd almost convinced myself the tension had faded. Then I heard his voice from across Main Street, calm, familiar. and talking to someone else, Megan. She'd just arrived from out of town, suitcase in hand, her hair pulled into the kind of neat ponytail that said she still believed in order. Aitan carried her bag, nodding while she talked. When she laughed, it was the polite kind, like she was trying to read the room before deciding how she felt about it. He spotted me first. A quick look, not a smile, not avoidance either, just recognition that we both had to act like regular people now. I lifted my hand slightly. He gave a small wave back, then turned to help Megan into the coffee shop. That night, I walked past the marina. The docks were quiet, the air thick with the smell of lake water and gasoline. I told myself it was good. He had someone. He looked steady. That's what he wanted. That's what I should want for him. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I missed the way things felt before I knew better. The next morning he texted, "Didn't mean for it to be weird. Hope you're okay." I stared at it until the words lost shape. Then I wrote back, "All good. Don't worry about it." It was the kind of lie you tell when you want to sound like a grown-up. Over the next week, I saw them a few times, at the diner, at the lakefront, once near my building when they passed by holding hands. Megan smiled and said, "You must be Chloe. I've heard about you." Her tone was friendly, but the kind of friendly that feels like a test. "Nice to meet you," I said, matching her pace. "You're here for long?" "Just visiting," she answered. "We've both been busy." Aitan looked down at the ground like he wished the conversation would end faster. After they walked off, I went upstairs and stared at the spare key still missing from its hook. He hadn't brought it back, and I hadn't asked. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe that was the problem. Work didn't help. I sat through video calls, nodding at words that didn't stick. Deliverable, feedback, revisions. I kept seeing his face when he said, "Maybe we kinda did expect it." There was no undoing that sentence. It lived somewhere in the air between us now, invisible but always there. One evening, just before closing, Megan came into the bookstore below my apartment. I was by the counter flipping through a travel guide I didn't need. She smiled again, warmer this time. "Aitan told me you moved back from the city. Must be a big change." "It is," I said carefully, "still getting used to it." She nodded, studying me for half a beat too long. "He said you two used to hang out a lot." "He doesn't really talk much about old friends." I shrugged. "Small town, everyone overlaps at some point." That made her smile tighten a little. "Right," she said, then added, "He's different when he's here." Calmer. After she left, I stood there for a long time. I didn't owe her guilt, but I felt it anyway. That night, I sat on the balcony again. The string lights flickered from wind. I tried to tell myself that what happened between me and Aitan was just timing. Two people out of sync, colliding because there was nowhere else to go. But that wasn't the full story. The truth was that I'd started to depend on his steadiness, and now that steadiness belonged to someone else. When I finally went inside, I locked the door, more out of habit than fear. I glanced at my phone once before setting it face down. I didn't want another message, not from him, not tonight. Still, when the screen lit up around midnight with his name, I didn't delete it. I didn't answer either. I just watched it fade, like something leaving on its own terms. 2 weeks later, the air turned colder. The mornings came with fog that swallowed the dogs, and my apartment smelled faintly of wet paper from the bookstore below. I'd stopped expecting to see him, but part of me still listened for footsteps on the stairs. Old habits take their time to die. The decision to leave didn't come with drama. One night, I was refilling my coffee jar and realized I hadn't felt settled since I'd arrived. Coming back home hadn't fixed anything. It just showed me what no longer fit. By morning, I'd booked a small sublet in Montreal for a month. A different city, not forever, just long enough to reset the compass. I texted Aitan that I'd be gone by the weekend. He didn't reply right away. Late that night, there was a knock. When I opened the door, he was there, hands in his jacket pockets, looking like he'd practiced what to say and lost half of it on the way over. "So you're leaving," he said. "Yeah, feels like time." He nodded once, eyes scanning the half-packed boxes. "You sure this is what you want?" "No." I said, but I think it's what I need. He stepped inside, careful not to cross too far. Megan went back yesterday, he said quietly. She asked if I was happy here. I didn't know how to answer. I sat on the edge of the desk, arms crossed. You don't owe me that answer. I know, but I wanted you to hear it anyway. We stood there for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. He looked around the room like he was memorizing it, even though nothing here belonged to him. I came to give this back. He placed the spare key on the table. The metal clinked softly, small but final. I wanted to say something that made it easier, but there wasn't anything left to soften. Maybe it's better this way, I said. Clean breaks. No half versions. He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maybe. Still feels like losing something. It is, I said, but maybe it's supposed to. He hesitated, then added, that night, I still think about it. Not what I saw, just the look you gave me, like you were somewhere else but not lost. I didn't know what to do with that, so I nodded. Then remember it like that. He looked at me one last time. The kind of look people give when they know they're supposed to leave but don't trust themselves to stay. Then he turned and walked out. His steps faded down the hall, slower than usual. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore. After he left, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the fog roll over the streetlights. For the first time since coming back, I didn't feel like I was escaping something. I was just moving on. The next morning, I carried my boxes down to the car. The lake was still, the kind of stillness that looks like understanding. I locked the apartment door behind me and slid my key through the mail slot. No ceremony, no tears, just closure. As I drove out of town, I passed the marina. Eitan was there, tightening a rope on one of the boats. He didn't see me, and I didn't stop. Some people stay so the place keeps its shape. Others leave so they can find theirs again. By the time the highway opened up, I rolled the window down and let the air hit my face. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was motion, and for the first time in years, that was enough.